it here.
I'm curious.
I found it. Let me tell you the story. This is where we came from. We came from a torn continent, destroyed by 2 world wars, impoverished, afloat, disoriented. But the European ideal started as a way to bring peace and stability to this continent, trying for the first time in our history to create a union of different people and culture on equal terms, a project of bringing people together, regardless of their race, gender, religion, culture. And we arrived to a point where the European Union created prosperity. Economic growth was seen as a model for other parts of the world, based on values such as democracy, tolerance, justice, human rights. Things seemed to be going in the right direction. So what went wrong?
Economic crisis, high unemployment, persistent low growth. The resurgence of populism, radicalization of society as a whole, the rise of terrorist groups who want to cause death and destruction. The future ahead seems dark sometimes, when we just focus on this news, on what pulls us apart, not what brings us together. Is this the future we want? Is this the future we see for ourselves and our children? Shouldn't we try to find a different way, tell a different story to the rest of the world? Shouldn't we tell ourselves a different story, a brighter one? A story of hope, of possibilities, of joy and happiness.
This is the story of a journey. This is the story of a new path. This is a story of a path towards a better Europe. A story of lives like the ones of you and me, who want simple things like peace, a job, a community who cares, an education for our children, a place where our taxes contribute to building a better society, and for a union of equality, justice, fairness. This is why we need to debate, discuss,
find new solutions.
together, juntos,
Społecznie.
Insieme.
razem, skupaj,
Together. Zusammen.
Sam.
Juntos.
Sein.
Juntos. Ensemble.
Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren,
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome.
herzlich willkommen zu diesem
To the Together meeting in Vienna. The Alliance of Social Democrats called for more democracy. This is why we're holding this Congress under this title here in Vienna. About 20 such events have been held in Europe. For 2 years, the S&D group has been on the road from Estonia to Finland, from France to Croatia. People meet, as we are meeting today, to discuss the future of Europe. I'm Susanne Pollinger, and I'm very happy to be able to be here with you today. I was happy to moderate the first of these events, and now I'm particularly pleased that here in Vienna, in this excellent former bakery, Expedithalle, which has been revived for events such as this. The last 2 years were not particularly happy years. This is a time of hate, nationalism, xenophobia. Well, we want to set the way. We're saying yes to democracy, yes to the rule of law. Josef Weidenholzer of the European Parliament is particularly committed to bring about this change. He knows he was the one who made sure that Seehofer got the prize, and I think she will be receiving the next prize as well.
Josef Weidenholzer hat den größten Teil.
Mr. Weidenholzer has devoted his life to science, but he's been a member of parliament for many years. He brought this Congress here to Vienna, so welcome, Josef Weidenholzer.
Ja, recht herzlichen Dank. Ich freue mich sehr, dass...
Thank you so much. I am very happy that you have all come and accepted our invitation. It shows that you are interested in the rule of law, because we as Social Democrats want to make sure that the rule of law is guaranteed, and the preparedness to commit to this. I know that some are interested in the demonstrations, which is very important as well. But joining our movement shows that many of you trust us, the Social Democrats, trust us to secure this rule of law. In the last few days and weeks, we found that the times were not easy. A number of times, I have to admit, we had to change the program, we changed the posters. Quite a lot has happened. And that is why I am so pleased that the relevant personalities have found their way here. I'm particularly happy that Pamela Windira-Ragnar is here with us. Pamela, welcome amongst us. A warm welcome to you. I'm also happy that Evelyn Regner is there as well. Happy to say. And I'm particularly pleased that Hannes Swoboda and Vice President Šefčovič have made it as well. We'll come to you as well. As for the assistants and all those involved, these changes were not easy, and I'd like to thank them very much so that the program was organized successfully. Many thanks to you all. These are historic times. We're not only seeing these changes in Austria. Austria is part of a tectonic fault between East and mid-Central Europe. It's a place of fate, a fateful place. Forces have developed which might bring the building to crash down, but might also help bring about something new. And this is why we're here today in Vienna, to defend democracy in Europe. 25 years after, in Copenhagen, the heads of state and government met and developed the Copenhagen criteria, we, the Social Democrats, were very much involved. Freedom, democracy, human rights are the foundations of the Union. Mr. Rasmussen, at the time, as President of the Council, gave the parting shot, as it were. We will be fighting for rule of law, democracy, and human rights. These are indispensable. They are the very compass of our actions, regardless of where these rights are infringed. We will be defending them. We are at the spearhead when it is about defending human rights and democracy and the rule of law. I'm saying that loud and clear, and it is irrespective of whether these infringements happen in the East or in the West, abroad or at home. We will always defend them, regardless of whether we're in government or not. If it's a social democratic party that's in government, we will also defend them. And in that spirit, we hope to develop today a very fruitful and inspiring discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weidenholzer. He's already welcomed you. I'm happy to welcome the #1 woman in social democracy, and we are very happy to give us her vision. And that is Pamela Rendi-Wagner. You have the floor.
Ja, lieber Joe, vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for those introductory words at the beginning of this event. I'm very grateful. Ladies and gentlemen, friends from neighboring countries and from the European Parliament in particular, I would like to welcome you here very warmly to Vienna and to the Expedithalle. So this is a working class area and an area where I spent part of my childhood. So it's very nice for me to be back here and to welcome you here. Now, lots of topical events and this theme of defending democracy and the rule of law is very topical. So we have to protect the rule of law. And, of course, this is very important. This is a priority, and we've heard about this in the introduction already. And, of course, this is, in particular, very important for us as socialists, social democrats. So, as social democrats, we have to do our bit at national level and European level to ensure that the fundamental values are respected and are a reality on a day-to-day basis in our own countries and in Europe. We cannot allow infringements and violations of these values. We cannot just ignore what is going on in some places at the moment, unfortunately. But what is our specific task then? What do we need to do? We can't just look around and see what's going on. We need to be very active and get involved. We need to get involved to combat the negative trends. We are seeing the journalists being murdered. We've had 3 recently, and this is terrible when journalists can't do their job freely and without danger. I think that this really is a terrible attack on our democracy. If we have policies and politicians that don't allow criticism and that don't respect civil rights, and when there is a lot of ignoring and neglecting of such rights, that is counter to everything we stand for and counter to everything Europe stands for. What does governing mean? It means much more. It means responsibility above all. It means we have to be responsible for individuals in our society, but we have to be responsible for society as a whole as well. What does it mean, governing? It means that we have to show where the limits are, but we have to defend our limits as well. Unfortunately, our political opponents are not doing that and are going against our values. It's not just a case of limits. In many cases, it's a case of pushing the limits and changing the limits and the boundaries. And unfortunately, this is being taken far too far in many places. There are these red lines that are being overstepped. That's why we need to get involved. Politicians like ourselves have to do what we can on a day-to-day basis to defend these lines. We have to work together because we are stronger together. But there is still cause for hope, because there are a lot of people who are standing up for what is right. There are journalists who, despite the risks and the dangers, are doing their job well, day and night. They are working independently and critically. There are all the people working on a day-to-day basis in NGOs as well, at national level and international level. Unfortunately, there are all those working in the justice field as well, and who don't allow themselves to come under political pressure, and they don't bow to that. And there are so many people who are committed and who are involved in our political family in Europe, standing up for their ideals and being fully committed. There are all those people who go to work day to day in the people who have grown up in free societies, and they also want their children and their grandchildren to grow up in free and open societies and communities. So that is very good, and it is a good sign, cause for hope. We saw a film at the beginning, and I think there was a good motto to that as well. Story of hope. That was the slogan. That has to be our narrative as well. We want to keep that story of hope. It's our responsibility not to just to have responsibility for the people. We need to work with people to shape an open and democratic Europe. The European Union didn't just grow up out of a chance to establish solidarity and to protect democracy, working for a united Europe against nationalism. We have to take Europe seriously. We really do, all the time. Member states, on the one hand, but also institutions of the European Union. We need to take them seriously. And I am firmly convinced, and I'm coming to the end of what I have to say, I'm firmly convinced that the European and the Austrian social democracy have a wonderful team here, Evelyn Regner and the others, and are making a very good contribution, and will continue to do so over the coming months and over the coming years as well. So with that, I wish you a very successful and very fruitful exchange. Thank you all very much indeed for coming.
Vielen Dank. Vielen Dank, Pamela Rendi-Wagner.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Rendi-Wagner. We now, well, the next great Congress will be in Copenhagen, but there are smaller events which we call Go Locals, where the discussion is on democracy and how we could forge a better Europe. And then there is EuropeTogether in the EU, and this is part of of our presentation. Anyone who's seen the last few congresses will know that not everybody can join in if they're not in the place. But we have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram possibilities of joining in online. You can make your contribution, and you can, in fact, bring it into our discussion here, the live one. I would be interested if any of you has participated in one of these congresses. Were you there? Did you join in online? Could you show? Ah, that's quite a big group there. That's good. So some of you have never been. So welcome to you again, all of you.
Ich freue mich jetzt, Herrn Udo Bullmann bei uns.
I would like to welcome Udo Bullmann, President of the S&D parliamentary group in the European Parliament. He's been at many congresses. His fields are economy, jobs, and I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say.
Vielen Dank für die freundliche.
Many thanks for such a friendly welcome. Friends, distinguished guests, this is a serious subject we are addressing today. Today, the Russians have understood that Viktor Orban expressly thanked the Golden Sunrise Group for support in a discussion with the majority in the European Parliament about the rule of law in Hungary. That group is so close to fascism that even Le Pen doesn't want to have anything to do with them. So can we ask the question, Mrs. Merkel, Mr. Kurz, how does it feel to be in a family with Mr. Orban? How deep can you sink in the EPP to allow that development to take place? And we might ask Mr. Weber, who would like to be a candidate of the EPP, how does it feel with Mr. Orban, for whom the majority of the CSU members voted in favor of? Well, friends, we know from all the great stories of mankind where the dark patches and the evil lies, that's where good things also emerge. Agnes Heller, a round of applause for her. Welcome. She's here.
Who could better represent the courage, the wisdom, and the energy of European citizenship, of European academic intelligence? You have no idea how proud we are to have you with us tonight. And it will be a pleasure. It will be a pleasure to listen to you and to discuss with you. Yes, indeed, Europe is under threat, and we have interesting enemies. Mr. Putin, who does not like the freedom that we live in our societies. But not only him, Mr. Trump, who does not like the social identity of European societies. The fact that workers have rights, that citizens have rights, and that social inclusion is flagshipping our European destiny. They don't like that. And we should not be surprised that they are fighting us. And we should also not be surprised that we, in the meantime, also have internal enemies. Let's speak about Hungary, let's speak about Poland, and let's speak about their attempt, the right-wing attempt to abolish independent justice, to abolish independent universities, to attack the freedom for expression, to attack trade unions, non-governmental organizations, and the freedom of the press. We only have one sentence for you, and this is Spanish, no pasarán. They will not make it. They will not make it against the many. They will not make it against us, because we are taking on this fight as we fought never ever for a better Europe. Wir müssen kämpfen.
We need to fight, but we'll only get the majority of people with us if Europe changes. If Europe is not just a Europe of markets and influence and selling goods, it has to be the Europe of workers, women and men who work every day, whose values are to be heard, not to be forgotten. Those who need social security, a future for their children, and that's all taken seriously. There is no force like the S&D fighting for that, and that is why the next European elections will be a discussion to find a better way for Europe. We know the whole world is looking at us. If we falter, if we are not strong enough, then freedom, rule of law, and social equality and fairness is shattered. Europe is being looked at by all those who are hoping for us to secure such freedoms, and that we will provide the discussion which Europe hasn't had yet. I'm looking forward to it.
Vielen herzlichen Dank, Herr Bullmann.
Many thanks, Mr. Bullmann. I'm happy to welcome Vice President of the European Commission. Since 2014, is the Energy Commissioner. Welcome to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Hello. Grüß Gott, guten Abend, good evening. And at first, thank you very much for your kind invitation. Dear Udo, dear Hans, dear Pamela, thank you very much for your kind invitation. Madam Heller, we are very proud that you could join us this evening, because for me, this evening is also very special, and therefore I really would like to thank you for your kind invitation. Why? Because we are going to discuss a very important topic, and also because I am your neighbor. And 30 years ago, I was standing on the bank of Danube in Bratislava, and I was looking towards Austria. But I was looking towards Austria through the barbed wire of Iron Curtain. I could see the lights, I could see the houses, I could see the cars, but I didn't believe that I would ever be allowed to visit your country. So it was this very strange feeling of being so close and so far at the same time. And I was living in a country without democracy, without freedom of expression, without free press. And I would be forever thankful to your TV, Madam Show, for your news, Nachrichten. It was only way how we could have a peek what's really happening in the world and what's happening in Europe. And of course, I will be forever thankful to Österreich Drive for all the music which we can record from this radio station, which was, as you can imagine, very important for teenagers and university students. And once the Iron Curtain was lifted, of course, Austria was the first Western country I ever visited. We got on these buses from Slovakia, come to see you, and forever we will remember how kind you've been, how hospitable you've been, and how much you understand what kind of distance we had to travel through the history and through these few kilometers, which was really keeping us apart for so long. Therefore, I know how important is the rule of law. How crucial are the free and brave journalists? How much we need the civic society? How we have to encourage active youth? And Zita would always remind us, as well as my daughters and my wife, how important are empowered women. And therefore I know how important it is that we socialists and democrats do well in the upcoming European elections, because we have to fight those who hate a united Europe and those who want to divide us again. I think it's really the high time that we should get really rid of these iron curtains in our minds and be proud Austrians, Slovak, Hungarians, but also Europeans, because it goes very well together, because it's the same. And I think that we have to be thinking on this, especially in these days, because next decade will decide if this century will be Chinese, American, or European. And I am absolutely convinced that today's troubled world needs strong Europe to succeed. And I myself see our Europe confident and proud, smart and green, socially fair and solidary. I'm absolutely convinced, as Pamela just highlighted in her introductory remarks, that our values can, should, and must be our main assets, because thanks to these values, Europe is the best place to live on this planet. So, how can we make sure that this would continue to be like that? And my recipe for this success is that we have to invest in our young generation. I really would like to make sure that we will allow them to be the best trained people on this planet. Because we know that top 10 professions of today didn't exist just 5 years ago. So let's transform, develop our Erasmus program into future-oriented Erasmus X program, which would create the possibility for every young person to upgrade their skills in digital, green tech, clean tech, or any other specialization they feel they need to be successful on this global labor market. And let us pursue ambitious industrial policy to make sure that the best electric cars, greenest batteries, and cleanest energy is produced here in Europe. And I know that it's possible because I work on this. And finally, let's extend helping hand to all those who are threatened by globalization, energy poverty, or coal transition. As you know very well, welfare state was invented by socialists, and it's up to us to build Europe that has everyone's back. To conclude, I really would like to underline how much I value, as I learned today, that I was the first international visitor to new leader of Social Democrats in Austria, to Pamela. Dear Pamela, thank you very much for your kind reception and for that very informative talk we had. And let me also wish all the success to Austrian Social Democrats and the lead candidates for the European Parliament elections. Dear Andreas, dear Evelyn, good luck, lots of success, and following the theme of today, let's do it together. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this personal insight into your life and for these good wishes. Wir kommen jetzt zur zentralen Keynote des heutigen Abends.
And we come now to our keynote address by Agnes Heiner, Agnes Hehler was born in 1929, is one of the most important philosophers on Earth at the moment. So she had to flee from Budapest, from National Socialism, and she studied later sociology. She's come to us today from New York, and I have had an opportunity to talk to her already today. But please be prepared, all of you, for hearing the fireworks that she has in her mind, in her head. So welcome, Agnes Hehler.
Thank
you very much indeed, Suzanne, for the introduction. I would like to talk to you, but what I will say is perhaps something you don't really want to hear. I will be talking more about problems than about hope, and I shall be talking German because I think that most of you understand German. I'm not a great fan of interpretation, I have to say, so I'm going to stick with German. So we saw a video this afternoon, didn't we? And it was about the First World War and also about the Second World War. And there was the first missed opportunity, and then bringing Europe together. Now, Hegel said about history that you only learn one thing from history, that you never learn from history. And I think that it should be possible, though, to learn from our past, from history. We've had 100 years of peace, but then we had the First World War. People were very enthusiastic. They had no idea what a war meant. They were motivated, though, by the ethnic and nationalism that was growing up at that time. And all this led to the two world wars, to the Holocaust, to the Gulag, and to 100 million deaths and corpses in Europe. I think it's very important to talk about that and to mention that to all of the nationalists around. They need to hear it. I think it's something that we should learn from our past and from our history. There are those who don't want to learn, though. That's a case of a warning or a promise. I think that this is our last chance in Europe. And if we miss that opportunity, then I think that Europe will never be able to play a political or cultural role in future. I think we'll go back to the past. And I think we will have no power at all in future if we miss that opportunity. So bear that in mind when you talk about the European Union. It's not the best it's not a perfect institution, but I think it is the best institution we have to promise us a future. So I think we shouldn't just maintain and keep the European Union. We need to improve it for the future. We can improve our institutions. We've spoken about that, but there are other improvements as well that can be made. There is no European consciousness. There are national consciousnesses. If you ask a child, you see, what it means to be French, for example, the French child will understand the question and will answer. And you can ask children from all over the world, from all the different countries. If you ask the child what it means to be a European, though, then the child probably won't understand the question. And that is what we have to think about in future. We need there to be a European consciousness. What does it mean to be European? Not just to be a member of a particular country. That doesn't mean that there would be no borders. It's much deeper than that, much deeper than that. It has to do with identity. That's what it's all about. And identity politics is ethnic nationalism now. Now, I can recommend a few things here. I think that we need to think about where we are at the moment. And where we are at the moment has to do with our history, as I said. I've spoken about ethnic nationalism, and that is a big threat to Europe. It's all about identity politics, as I said, and it's a negative ideology. I think that there's this case of Hungary, and the government is saying it's a case of defending the country against threats from coming all sides. But it's all negative. It's a negative ideology. Unfortunately, however, there is no positive ideology at the moment. Positive ideologies have disappeared. They're not there anymore. We think back to the past and communism. We had positive ideologies in the past, but they have disappeared. There is despair and disappointment, and that can be the result of some ideologies, but it's not what I would wish you, of course. It's better to look ahead to the future and talk about universal progress, but no one believes in that anymore. There's progress. We have progress in our lives and in our institutions. Let me just mention one thing here to do with mobility. I would say there is no social mobility at the moment, but social mobility is very important. You need social mobility because it gives people prospects. If poor people don't have prospects, then it is inherited poverty for them. Their children won't be able to benefit from social mobility, and that is a terrible thing for children if there is no social mobility and the poor always remain poor. I think there are lots of dangers and threats around. I've spoken about identity politics already. This is nihilistic. These are negative ideologies, and we don't want that, of course. There's nothing intellectual about that. These ideologies cannot create a culture in any way. Even the bad people will believe in something. I would say nowadays that it is a cultural fight in Hungary against everything that is cultural. The government in Hungary has no culture. It's not aware of culture in any way, doesn't attach any importance to it. there is no support among philosophers for the government, for the ruling party in Hungary. Now, I think we need to know our time. We need to understand our time better. If we think about Hungary and what's happening with Orban, that we need to bear in mind that that is not an exception. It's not happening by chance. I would say it's almost a general rule, actually. We are living in very different times to 200 years ago. In those days, of course, the situation was very different indeed on our continent. I'm not talking about England. That is a different tradition in terms of a liberal democracy. But elsewhere in Europe, that wasn't known. It was only really after the Second World War and in the 50s and 60s. In West Europe, anyway, that we saw this growing up. We had Franco Salazar, the Greek generals in Europe. And I would say that we saw the start then. I'm not talking about the Soviet Union. In other countries, of course.
Ich sage, wir hatten keine Fehlerzeit. Die meisten Zeiten haben
most of the time we had Germany and France, and we had the Nordic states as well. And I would say this is a problem for us. In Eastern Europe and in Southern Europe as well, Italy, for example. Have a look there. It's not we expected, is it, from Italy?
In Europa,
well, in that century, there was totalitarian up until the 60s in Europe. In Western Europe, or back in the 50s, there was totalitarianism. Totalitarianism is a formation where one party takes power, seizes power, not through elections. Mussolini, Hitler got a maximum of 37%. So these people didn't reach power through elections. That's why they were totalitarian. Now we have a new form of tyranny. And that is why we want to talk about democracy and rule of law. But we need to interpret that situation because this new tyranny, these new tyrannies, well, I use the word because in Hungary, everything Orban wants and decides is tyranny in the old Greek meaning. It's the same in Turkey, in Egypt, the same in Venezuela, too. I'm not going to go through the series of them. People, the modern tyrants, are actually elected by the majority time and again, which means they can say that they are democracy. We are democracy, they say, because democracy goes through majority. They have been elected by the majority. The others are in the minority. We, they say, are democracy. Plus, we are strong, they say. Because who declares what the law is? Who is going to rule? I don't know who mentioned ethics and politics, one of the previous speakers this evening. Well, Kant said that politics cannot base itself on morals, but it should not contradict morals or morality. That's simple. the man who obeys the laws should be such that they don't contradict our conscience. In other words, we should express our conscience without infringing the laws. So, now, today, it is important to discuss the defense of the rule of law and of democracy. And if you discuss that, you must know how many votes will be going our way. How can we defend them if we don't have the power? In order to protect, you need power. Power isn't a negative thing. It's only if you have power for the sake of having power. But power to do something, to achieve something, to obtain something, well, that is good. Udo, you said we need to defend. Well, I have to ask, what sort of power do you have? We need the votes. How do you get votes? You get votes from the mass society. You get votes through ideology, not interests. There are no class interests. It goes through ideology, the votes. And identity politics, well, we talk about ourselves. We need to belong rather than just football. Yes, trade unions, we need to belong. I asked a Brazilian woman what is meant. If your son is proud, she'll say, football makes him proud. So there's your identification. So the question is, what kind of ideology, what kind of identity? A national ideology is a kind of ideology which speaks to your emotions, fires the imagination. People can identify, can understand. That's not in the negative sense, in the positive, this imagination. You need an ideology of that kind, otherwise you won't achieve anything. Without power, you can't defend. You can organize demonstrations. My daughter is organizing one on Saturday against nationalism. There are demonstrations and nothing happens. Something has to happen. For something to happen, the demo has to be such that it will fire the imagination of people, that will promise something, not vague or wrong promises, for a future for which they must be mobilized. One of you said that people don't vote because they think that makes no difference. People think it makes no difference. Well, what makes a difference for them is when something happens which will fire their imagination and will provide a future for them to believe in. If you defend somebody only, then it's an ideology, but you must not engage in propaganda when promising a future. Propaganda doesn't work for people. It's got to be something different. I'm not a politician. All I can do is describe the situation as it is today. Today, we are at a crossroads. In German, it's Kreuzweg, crossroads. We can go either way. And I think it is important. The whole energy in this matter needs to be mobilized so that we choose the right path in this crossroads. The improvement of the Union, I know that no party in the Union alone can bring about to produce a European awareness in people. But you can get people, even 5-year-olds, to be aware of Europe. And that's what I wish for the European Union. That is what I wish for ourselves. I'd rather not like to die to see Europe a shipwreck left behind me when I die.
Alles ist, nein, ich sag's ja nicht.
Vielen Dank, Agnes Heller. Ich glaube, wir brauchen die Stühle gar nicht. Ich glaube, wir werden. Darf ich Sie noch mal bitten, die runterzuräumen, weil ich glaube, wir brauchen die nicht. Vielen Dank.
Would you just remove the stools? I don't think we need it. I'm glad you're staying here on the stage with me. So we'll both be here. Well, I think we will have 4 or 5. So let me welcome Andreas Schieder, who, at the beginning of his career, began as Vice President of IUSI. And he was the Speaker of the SPO. And then later he was the president of the Young Socialists. He's a passionate foreign politician, and together with Evelyn Regner, is a lead candidate for the EU. So welcome to you, Mr. Schieder.
Ich begrüße sehr herzlich, vielleicht erzähle ich kurz und Sie kommen dann drauf, wenn wir...
I'll say a few words, and then Susanne Scholl, welcome. She knows politics. She's an observer, journalist, and writer. With her analyses, she has been reporting on the various organizations. Well, congratulations to that career, and welcome, Susanne Scholl.
Und ich begrüße herzlich Evelyn Regner.
Also, welcome to Evelyn Regner, SPÖ leader in the EU Parliament. She's been for years a member in the European Parliament, previously was in Brussels and in the delegation for Austria. She works for workers and workers' wives. Welcome to you, Evelyn Regner. This debate is about defending Europe and what can we do. Andreas Schieder, I'll give you the floor straight away to kick off. Thank you very much. Good evening to all. I'm most impressed by what Mrs. Heller said. Possibly a couple of comments from my point of view. These are difficult times. Much of what we used to believe was obvious is no longer obvious. And that is an important point which needs to be raised. I remember in the 90s, when the Young Socialists and Europeans were founded, we were under the impression that, as Mr. Šefčovič said, with the collapse of the Iron Curtain, Europe would be growing, and the great idea was one thing would lead to another, democracy, and then social and cultural progress. Now it's no longer so obvious. The writer, Mr. Kohlmeier, recently, in a speech, he said, mankind has never reached greatness with a huge step, only gradually with small steps. And isn't that also seen in Hungary? I remember when we discussed when the first impingements on freedom of the press happened, people said, "Oh, not so tragic." When the banks were being given a short shrift there, then people said, "Oh, we need to do something about it." Before it was all about human rights, press freedom, nobody spoke up. Now we're in Chapter 7, and we need to think, shouldn't we have acted before? Mrs. Heller said we are at a crossroads in Europe, and I fear that it is true. We need to think in society, as politicians, how, when we live together and want to live together, where do we depart? Do we depart from where the nationalists and all this fog about solving everything through nationalism, when in the end different things will happen? Or do we need to develop Europe further rather than just say, we're in favor of Europe, full stop? We need to say Europe has to continue developing. Europe is the only unit where we can have social fairness. This internal market has so many loopholes, tax, social care, and political loopholes, which we need to plug. And Europe is before this crossroads. Which way do we go? To be in favor of Europe, yes, that's clear, but we need to fight for a better, different, and fairer Europe, where there is more unity and more fairness.
Ich bin Ihnen ganz einverstanden.
Yes, I didn't understand absolutely everything, I'm afraid. But what we have today, it's still better than nothing.
Scholl, okay. Frau Scholl, Sie...
So, Mrs. Scholl, I've introduced you. Recently, you've become known as an activist. So, you've been working in the media. You're very active, and I would like to know, how can we make Europe better? What you're doing, can it help? Well, it would be nice if it could, I suppose. We are a group of individuals, really, and we are seeing what's going on. We've been living here for quite a while. We look around and see what the situation is, and we have noticed that Europe has been developing in the wrong direction. And we are part of civil society. And, this is my favorite subject, really. Let me say two things. First of all, the main mistake that has been made is that the EU is more of an economic union rather than a political. It's what Andreas Schieder was saying earlier. The banks in Hungary were in danger, and that's when the EU started acting. But when human rights were threatened, then Europe looked away. And I think that, that was a big mistake to act in that way. And I think we need to change that. We need to have a different approach. We need to focus on the living conditions of our children and grandchildren in the future. That is what is really important. That's what really counts for me as a grandparent, but also for others as well. Secondly, Europe can be saved, but only if there is solidarity, a cross-party solidarity. That is absolutely necessary, and it's very urgent as well. I think that there are divisions at the moment. What happens is that the parties are completely divided in terms of policies, and there is a tendency to say, I can't agree with what that party is doing because I'm a member of another party. But there is so much frustration. The electorate is frustrated as a result of that, and it also means that you have the extremes on either side, but we are allowing ourselves to be divided by the extremists. But we can't be divided in that way. We need to win over. We need to be stronger than the extremists. Thank you.
Redner, über die Parteigrenzen hinweg setzt man sich auch für Arbeit.
Well, you've been working for workers. What is your idea of a different Europe? How can the interests of these people be defended? Well, first and foremost, Mrs. Heller, you've infused us, everybody, and the young will take away with them what you have told us this evening. I'd like to join into the identity theme, which is difficult sometimes. I've thought about it. And yes, there is a European identity. I don't want to say, let's hide and pretend and wonder whether we are Viennese, are we Hungarian, or from Misselbach. There is something more. There is a European identity. We have developed a social state in Europe after the Second World War, after what we've lived through. There's not just something that needs to be defended, but that needs to be developed jointly amongst us all our citizens that have joined us from Central and Eastern Europe into the European Union. It is feasible, and that brings us into the national debate. It's about health insurance, it's about unemployment benefits, it's about fair wages, it's about some security and stability which everybody needs regardless of where they are. And that's something that unites us. In Spain, in Greece, in Hungary, people have something they all share which we built in Europe. And that's the point. Not just defend, but carry forward, each and every one of us. So that's why it's important, and it makes sense that we don't just talk about, as I've just heard from the Austrian Chancellor after the recommendations. Do we do it all at national level or all together? No, only if we grab hold of a problem at European level jointly, whether it's social matters, rule of law or democracy, well, then we are also national. We're also working locally, and we will be strong enough to take things forward individually. That's a wonderful image. Yes, we can do something together because it is about these major social achievements.
Ja, das ist auch eine Wahl.
Yes, that's a choice, though, isn't it? What has Europe done? Europe has invented human rights, and Europe has invented the Enlightenment as well, civil rights as well. That is Europe as well. But Europe also invented totalitarianism, and fascism as well, the negative things as well. You know, there are two Europes, and you have to choose between the two Europes. So that is an important choice for Europe, is it? It's not all black and white, is it? That's what our history is made up of, but it's not all black and all white.
Und ich glaube, Dystopien sind sehr nützlich, wenn sie uns die Gefahren zeigen.
I think dystopians are very important, showing us the dangers and the risks and the threats. It's not just everything that's happy, is it? I remember the past, and I'm sorry to say this in your presence. But the bureaucrats from Brussels weren't there. I can remember that. Only it would say everything's wonderful. It's a brilliant, you know. And however, member states, and we are now, and we're going to be more and more. And there were young people who were leaping into the future, jumping into the future, and that really irritated me. And I said, no, please not that. There are going to be conflicts. There are going to be bad days as well. There's bound to be a conflict, I said, between the centre and the outlying areas. We mustn't forget where we are, that there is always a danger around the corner. We mustn't forget that. We can't take everything for granted. We can't forget the past. We are always faced with the choices, always, and it's very important that we are aware of that. That we are aware of the choices we have. Because if we are aware of the choices, then we can make the right choice and not to make the bad choice. I've spoken about this before. In 1792, you know, the French made a bad mistake, didn't they? They could have acted differently. They could have made a different choice. They had a choice. But, of course, you can only act in the present, really. Fortunately, we have good historians who can teach us about the past.
Vielen Dank. Bevor Sie einhaken, möchte ich nur sagen,
just like to say that you can contribute. If you'd like to ask a question, let us know. We do have microphones that we can send around the room. I would like to make a comment as well, if I may. In the Russian Revolution, the same mistake was made as well, you know. So that's history. It's very easy to forget history, isn't it? It is a bad mistake to make, though, and we are faced with that risk nowadays. We have people in power who don't want to remember the past, and I would say Italy is one of the best examples of that. There's our region as well, but what about the European Constitution? Was that a mistake? Would you think so? Yes, I think it was, that it wasn't adopted. I think it was a mistake as well.
I don't think you can excuse the governments. I didn't say that this was an excuse. When you say, well, these young people don't know history. No, we must realize that this is a tactic of power. Seehofer, Salvini, whatever their names are, they put on this struggle against Islam, the burqa. At the back of their minds is to provide more money for the wealthy, to destroy the social care system. The schools are disappearing. We've seen that in history. So this right ideology does divert your attention from what's actually happening in the government. Then you talk about these populists. At long last, these are people who are working for the people. No, they are working against the weak in society and are destroying their lives and only favoring the big boys, the ones that are on top already. We must make that clear so that nobody should think that Salvini is salvation. Yes, but I don't think that's not the only problem, that history is being forgotten. They are changing, manipulating history.
Weil wir jetzt natürlich in einer sehr, also natürlich auch die gerade deshalb auch.
Yes, you're right. We have there is this shadow side, of course. If we think about the infringements of the rule of law, yes, they exist, but I think it is important to be optimistic as well. I'm very interested in all the participants here, and I'm interested in this podium discussion as well. I would say that a lot has all changed in the last decade in terms of an opening up. There is more openness and awareness of human rights, basic fundamental rights. We know what the problems are with the electorate and the need and voting and so on, but there are other developments as well that we have seen over the last decade. We have seen that there are more NGOs. People are more aware of the civil society as well. They know that their vote counts as well. I remember the Swedish elections and other elections as well. Yes, of course, we have known problems with elections, but there is a lot of awareness now. People are much more aware that their vote counts and that they need to go to and put their vote in the ballot box. I think it's our job in Austria and elsewhere in Europe. It's not just a case of putting our hand out and helping. I think we need to work to ensure that there is more participation and a better electoral turnout so that people do go out and vote in the elections. I have seen quite a few people asking for the floor. I am from the Austrian press agency. I have a question, if I may. Salvini, Italy have been mentioned several times. The populists, right-wing populists, are successful because they are exploiting the migration situation. But what is the answer from Social Democrats? How can Social Democrats go and combat that success of the populists? Thank you for the question. Who would like to answer? Well, this migration crisis is a massive human crisis. We have to have a humanist solution to that crisis. But of course, it is being used as a weapon by politicians in some countries, convincing their populations or that they are protecting their population from rapes and so on. It's like they're using it as a weapon. It was like a gift from God, and that's what they're using it as. They're exploiting the situation. A pragmatic answer from me, of course, we have taken a lot of action at the European Parliament, and you know the measures. There are solutions, there are policies, but of course, you can't just work nationally. There's a question of sovereignty, but it's not going to work if the solutions come on a national level only, with the closing of borders and so on. And you can't have a national solution either to allowing in migrants. It has to be done orderly, in an orderly fashion. We have to develop principles. We have principles that need to take account of human rights, but we have to have a pragmatic approach as well, because we can't open our arms to the whole of Africa. It has to be done in an orderly fashion. There is a lot being done, and decisions have been taken already by the European Parliament. What do we do, though, when we have nation states who say, no, we're not going to do it that way. We want our own national solutions. It's only national measures that are good enough. And that is a problem. We have to deal with it. We need to raise awareness And I would say we need to do more to do that. We have to make sure that the measures that are there are implemented properly in an orderly fashion. You've got Orban, Salvini, you're right, but we need to address those issues properly in an orderly fashion.
Well, maybe I'm going to strike a disparaging note. This is something all social democrats need to realize. We've not acted early enough. The migration crisis is not a migration crisis, but a crisis of European politics. The refugees, I'm really sorry, but as far as I've observed in Austria, in Italy, in other countries, social democracy tends to say, let's build walls and close Mediterranean routes. Don't let anyone else come in. It's nothing to do with us. Send them back as many as possible. Social democracy has done nothing against that. That's why we are where we find ourselves now. I'm sorry, but social democracy was in government and could have done something and didn't do anything. Of course, it's a matter of what is happening in Brussels, but it's really about what national states are doing. Austria could have taken some when we were still in the government. That didn't happen. Oh, I agree with what you're saying. But I do think migration is a problem. It's not only an European problem, not just Europe, a world problem. In statistics, we've seen that the assets of the poor and rich countries have reduced. Within each state, this grew, but migrants don't only come from war zones, but they come from where there's no food or water. They're expelled by their own governments. Migration is a world problem. But the crisis is a political crisis in Europe, not migration. Well, in that case, it's basically a Christmas present.
Quasi ein Zuteilen, wessen Krise es ist,
No, I think we're conflating different crises actually here. I think that in Austria, we can defend actually what has been done. We had, yes, a social democratic government, and a decision was taken deliberately in relation to the decision taken in Hungary. A decision was taken to open the borders. So we are defensive really, because we want the situation to be portrayed as it really was. We don't want it to be distorted. I would say we've seen we have seen changes, but not radical changes necessarily. There has been successful integration of a lot of people, but of course we still have a question at European level in relation to integration. More money, more efforts are needed, and I would say that. We had Sebastian Kurz, but he's just blocked everything, I suppose. But there were the measures that were there. It wasn't just a case of leaving society in peace. We did do things in the past. So, please. I think you're right to say that migration is a world problem. we've got other continents as well. It's not just restricted to Europe. We have refugees in other continents as well, in Asia, Lebanon as well, in the regions bordering on Syria as well. So it's not just a problem for Europe. So how do we address the problem? I think we need to have a global approach. We need to look at a foreign policy as well, and we need to see the mistakes that have been made in relation to Syria. If we want Europe to be more involved, then we have to allow Europe to get involved, and we have to allow Europe to develop its foreign policy as well, I would say.
Ich würde jetzt gern weitergehen.
Well, I would like to move on. We've got a question from the floor. I'm from Forward Europe. This lack of European identity was discussed. I found that fascinating. My question is, how can this European identity be strengthened or created? I don't know. I haven't a clue. I don't know. I just know that there's a lacking. It's a problem that there is no European awareness. Basically, people need to know who they are, because they're not what they are if they don't know what they are. That's the case. I'm not a politician. I don't have this imagination of a politician. I just see it as a problem. And I don't know. The young people should know. You should know. We can't do it. Politicians can't create an awareness. They can establish a network within. I don't know how you can create that identity. Maybe the politicians here on the plateau can say something on that. These are politicians, or some of them anyway. There was another question. While our guests are wondering, could you please take the floor? Yes, your question. Thank you, Randy Wagner and S&D. Congratulations for nominating you. I'm sure you will triumph. On migration, well, there have been mistakes made, but now let's talk about integration. We had a TV report on the many refugee camps that have been created and are now empty. At the same time, resources are being cut for integration, and that's disgusting. And that is why that's work waiting to be done. Now, it's not the influx of migrants, but the lack of integration work from governments. And finally, I believe Agnes Heller was right in saying, and I really agree, that we've got the European Union. There is no better union, and without it would be a great shame. I do agree that we need to have a better one, and that's where I would disagree with Mrs. Scholl. The European Union was created to fight racism, wars, and nationalism. It wasn't to start with an economic tool. There were economic tools that were used, instruments, but on Hungary, who said something first? It was the European Union. The European Parliament for years criticized the attitudes of Orban in Hungary, and the Commission joined to do something. So, with the wish of having a better European Union, let's forget who is taking the Polish government to court for their measures. It's the European Union. Not a single head of state got up and accused. It was the European Parliament that did, and the S&D group in that parliament. We need to remember that. We mustn't always trot out the old mantra, the European Union is failing. Yes, of course, there's a lot that needs to be better and needs to be done. But the European Union moved in where member states have failed, Salvini and the others. The danger is that national states are being priority, and it's that nationalism we must combat, because the opportunities are there for the European Union, but to use it better, we need a stronger social democracy.
Wir haben da hinten deine nächste Wortmeldung.
Is there anything that you would like to say? I think hatred is the worst, isn't it? In Hungary, yes, you mentioned Orban. There's what's going on there in Hungary. There is the border being closed to the migrants. You know, I prefer to talk about immigrants and migrants. What's bad, rather than that, is the hatred. The hatred. Migrants and immigrants are hated. The population wants to kill them. That's terrible. That's so dangerous. If you have hatred and you stir up hatred, incitement to hatred, that is very dangerous.
Bitte schön.
Ich komme von Roma Interparlamentarische Organisation.
I come from a parliamentary organization, from a Roma parliamentary organization, and I would like to thank you for what has been said, and I would like to thank Europe for what it has done so far to help with the integration of Roma. I have a question for the lead candidate, the Spitzenkandidat. What is his position? I would like to know whether the candidate is going to come up with a plan to promote the integration of Roma. There are some 10 million in Europe, and there are also considerable numbers of Roma in Austria. I'd like to know whether the Spitzenkandidat has a plan. Yes, you're absolutely right. We do need to do more, and we will be doing more to do that for the integration of the Roma.
Bitte. Genau, vielleicht, das ist jetzt ein bisschen auf die Seite lastig.
Maybe we should switch sides a little bit. We've had lots of questions from one side. We don't want to feel want the other side to feel neglected. No?
Ich bin Shahid Hossain. Ich würde sagen, ich komme von der Mitglied des Zivilgesellschaft.
I'm a member of civil society. I have a question. I've been observing what's been going on, and it seems to me that for a better Europe, we need to ensure that there are cross-party approaches and a common denominator. We need to identify that. I think that we need some kind of a common approach, cross-party approach to the problems. Unfortunately, we are not seeing that at the moment. We need more people to speak with one voice.
Der junge Herr da möchte auch noch was sagen und dann.
Thank you very much. Would you like to come back on to that question? Next question. I'm a young social democrat from Linz. I've come from Linz to Vienna especially for this event. I actually didn't want to ask a question. Thank you. But I wanted to make a comment. I observed earlier, and I've done so repeatedly, that we keep being lured into this discourse on migration. I don't want the EU elections to be about migration. It's about improving the living conditions of people and how to unite Europe further. I see that you work for the lorry drivers. That's great that something is being done for the workers in Europe. So let's make sure that we work towards social union, tax union, ways to improve the lives and living conditions living in the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you for the question or the comment. We'll go over to the other side now, shall we? If you'd like to turn round. So, where is the microphone? There we are. So I'd like to welcome you, and you have the floor, madam. The microphone isn't working. Oh, thank you. I don't think I need to introduce myself then anymore. A lot of important things have already been said. We need to work towards a better Europe, a new Europe, and criticism has been expressed in the past, in particular in relation to the tax loopholes. This has been a very important topic. We're working to close those tax loopholes, but we know that in our family, political family, it's not very easy to address this. Particularly those who are in government positions. It's not always easy to reach an agreement on this. So how do you think we can exert pressure as a political family in this area? It is important, I think, that we take strong measures and come up with a strong position as a political family, but how can we go about it? We saw what happened in relation to austerity as well, didn't we? We weren't necessarily in agreement there. Do you think that realistically we can close these tax loopholes in the countries concerned?
Well, actually, I really have to respond. It's true that positions differ throughout Europe. Whenever we think of the sort of clean up before your own door, before you accuse others. Well, theoretically, yes. However, I am totally convinced that European social democracy as it is does defend and does do everything to ensure that these measures are prepared and tidied up. There are so many cases. Well, there's this money laundering, the tax fraud, all the corporate taxes, which are so important that they are fair, and we are against these injustices. And if there's a government in any country doesn't do things properly, well then the most of social democrats will combat that. I am totally convinced that this is something that unites us all. Well, I think that it is of interest to us all. But do you think that in these elections, will these interests move the voters? Well, nobody's going to be interested when I talk about the consolidated corporation tax and the great progress that we have achieved in that field. Of course, that's obvious. But we can break it down into areas where it is shown that it's unfair if some pay and others don't. That wears down the state and society as a whole, the young and the old. And that's the reason why in Europe there's this lack of efficiency where people are pitched against each other, where one family gets something and the other doesn't or less. When it comes to the great principles and the basic ideas of who is contributing to society. Well, that's where you can motivate people. If you talk to people in the street, it's not just about corporation tax. You have to approach them at their level.
Skeptischer sehe ich sogar von hinten.
Well, I can see that you're sceptical. I can see that just by looking at the back of you. Well, tax, you know, that's Orban's battle horse as well, isn't it? Reducing tax. We say it's unfair. We are saying who should get tax reductions. That's what we're concerned about. Who can benefit from a tax reduction and who can't? There's talk of tax reduction. Have people's lives become better in Hungary? Well, no, they haven't, because those who could have benefited most haven't benefited most. They didn't have the tax reductions, and there are thousands of billions of euros that aren't paid in tax and that should be. I think that, you know, with all that, if that were paid, then we could fund perfect schools for all children in Hungary.
30%.
Okay. Ich habe jetzt
Well, I now have Philip as an ambassador here.
My name is Philip, and I'm from Poland, the eastern part of the region. And it's the place where the populists have, let's say, the biggest support from the society. And I wanted to ask you, what are you doing or what are your plans to prevent them, to, let's say, engage people into democratic process of elections? Because personally, I have never seen any of the European parties present in my city, region, or maybe even country. All I see is the same old faces who are inside the politics in my country, right? And that's my question.
We don't talk of our old faces.
Yeah.
Thank you, Philip.
What do you mean, us?
I mean people who are, let's say, for a long time in a policy, but they actually don't bring anything new to here, who are just sitting there and actually do nothing. They don't focus on improving the lives of the people. They just get elected and that's all.
So, I mean, I just would like to grab this. Aren't we talking about prejudices? I just referred to our party leader, to our Austrian party leader. I think we're just one of those examples where you see that someone being close to our ideas, but not part of our family, representing really many things, more or less also from not directly from the perspective already from the cradle on, is right now representing social democracy. And I think just when we're talking about us, that we're so open and open-minded to invite all those who are interested and who would like to move something, who would like to change the society, to go on board. And when you just go in and look into the daily work of those, and I'm talking right now of, as a European parliamentarian, and when you just look at those, what we are doing, and maybe just following it a little bit, then you can be absolutely convinced that we're not only sitting in our parliaments and doing our committee work, but that we are jumping wherever, in whatever means, and going to enterprises, to the streets, to whatever, NGOs, and trying to have our debates and also the feedback. What can we change? What can we take on board for our daily work? Day by day, and be it with boring taxes issues, and being with the topic of, I mean, how is it to be a truck driver? What does it mean for you? What do you earn? Do you sleep in your cabin, or what is the situation in the streets? How you can do and what can you improve that? That we are really doing that. We, as Social Democrats in the European Parliament, we are really doing that. Being there in the daily life, and then of course also trying to be there in the plenary and change it via our legislative measures.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
If you can wait, you can tell us later, but you have to hand over the microphone to the person. Bitte, wir haben jetzt noch zwei, also mit Ihnen.
We still have 2 requests for the floor, and then I think we would need to close the debate. May I speak German? Yes, I'm also from the trade union movement, and I totally agree with Mrs. Heller that hate is the absolute food for right-wing. In politics and in the EU, we must do something against it. Love and humanity. The example must be set by the EU where there are examples, human examples, which show that solidarity and love will achieve it more properly. This has to be taught people on a day-to-day basis, because the good can teach and convince people. Well, that might have been a nice end, but we still have 2 more requests. Agnes Toya, I'm a simple party member. My own personal history is that I have children who have gone to school, which was excellent in Austria. Academically, they had a life in Austria, and they have now. But when it came to working relations, they found that in New York, across the ocean, their job opportunities are better than in Austria. And this brings me to my topic, which is precarious working conditions. Young people, amongst many of my colleagues are there, find that they are only able to have a part-time job with no job security, working seasonally, and whether social democracy might not be advised to do something about that throughout Europe. Yes, with many exclamation marks. Unfortunately, I'll have to bring the discussion to an end. We still have a request for the floor. Would you like to make a comment from the back, after which we'll have to jointly take all these points and reply? Well, thank you. I'm Itanas Pekanov. I'd like to make a comment and a question. My comment is on something that Mrs. Rendy said, which was very accurate as regards this subject. I know there are many people who have worries about the situation, even though in politics there are some things that are not true. I've heard that Vienna is a place where you can't live. It's dangerous. The society has changed a lot. And these are things that are being picked up by the extreme right, and they're very effective in Eastern Europe. And that's why you have to say, no, that's not true. Vienna is still the best city in the world. I've always lived in Vienna. It isn't like that. And we have to say, no, that's not true. There's limits in debate. You can't allow these fake things to be put out. And of course, I know in the cultural struggle they can score a few points. But when it comes to economic questions, I might ask, haven't the last few years shown that the conservative politics have led to lots of loss in growth? These are points which we need to raise in preparing for those elections. Thank you.
So, you have a question, do you? Yes, thank you. I have a question. We've got a newspaper article here going back to 2017, And this was about Kern. It's an article about what he said. How can you explain his policy here?
Reichen Sie bitte das Mikrofon einfach zu der... Na?
Can you hand your microphone over to your neighbour, please? Thank you. I am an interested party, and I would just like to say that I think Susanna Scholl is right. I think there does need to be more of an alliance on the left. I think that then the party will be stronger. I think that young people need to have a stronger voice as well. We need to encourage young people to participate and to come forward. That would really help, I think.
Und auch die Arbeitslosen und die von Armut.
We need to include as well those in poverty and also those who are jobless. They need to be encouraged to participate more. Thank you. What would you say to that? So much has been said, hasn't it? And there are so many problems to address. It is very important to listen to interested parties and to take account of what the population wants. I think those are good concluding words. Thank you.
Gibt es noch was von eurer Seite, was ihr...
Would you like to add anything?
Ich habe mir gedacht, das war schon ein schönes Schlusswort eigentlich.
Yes, that was a very good conclusion, I would say. But of course, we often discuss our European approach, our policy, as if Europe was very far away from us. And I think that it is important that we improve the situation of people on the ground, of the poor and the jobless. The state has its level, but the community is an important level as well. The topics and the subjects may be the same on the different levels, but there are some issues that cannot be dealt with properly at national level, and that is where we need a European approach. And so you have to intervene at the right level. But I would say that wherever Sebastian Kurz is acting, you get a bad result. I think it's very important to get that message across. And we don't want Kurz to carry on doing bad work. We need to ensure that that changes. Thank you.
Okay.
Ich glaube, der Andi Schieder hat jetzt ein schönes Schlusswort zum
I don't think I need to add anything really. I think we should leave it with Agnes Heller's words of conclusion. I think that is the best conclusion. Thank you very much.
Diese Runde jetzt beschließen.
Thank you. We come now to the presentation of the Together ambassadors. Zita Gomay, President of PES Women, is going to present the ambassadors. So these are young people who have been very involved online, on the internet, and who have done a lot of work to get support for the party. So Mrs. Gomay is now going to present the two ambassadors.
I wish to speak German, but I still have 50 years to make it. So, first of all, anybody who is in the room knows that this is International Day for Girls. So, this is also a type of promotion. And Pamela, before you run away, I wanted to let you know how important that after 130 years, when our party is not in a good shape, because that's the model for the Social Democrat, women get the challenge to make it. So I just would like to give you good luck. And you have to promise me that concerning the next European Parliament election, we fight together. Can you come here? Can you come here? Can you come here? Because I would like to show you. Shoulder by shoulder to change Europe, because if women lead Europe, then Europe can change better. And don't forget one thing. We both have been born in a family with a mom. I lost my dad. She also lost her dad in a way. But we are here. We are here because you are. And this is the message that we would like to pass. Social Democrat never gives up. Good luck. And of course, to be in politics for such a long time, being 50 plus, and as I told you, I still have 50 years more, I'm absolutely happy to greet my friends here in the room. I can tell you, Hungary could never join to the European Union without Hannes Swoboda. So Hannes is my brother forever because he knew how to make it. And, sorry that I am telling another man, can you imagine that there is a district in Budapest which is called Józsefstadt, and my friend József Feldenmüller is a great fighter for rule of law in Hungary. So I just would like to thank you. Excellent job, József. And of course, I would like to make something clear. And honestly, Philip, you are definitely right. Election is from the day of the election and the day of the re-election, if you are good enough. So the question is, are we good enough for your generation? Honestly speaking, after what you said, I have some doubt. So, why you are going to be our ambassador with Mavi? Because we need young women and men who help to pass the message to make a stronger Europe together. Together, together, because this is the aim of this conference. And don't forget that I have sisters. And it is absolutely important to have sisters in the European Parliament. And honestly speaking, I think it's absolutely crucial what Evelyn is doing. Because how we European Social Democrats should behave, to be on a constant discussion with trade unions, whether we are in power or whether we are not in power. We cannot make a difference when we do. And of course, concerning migration, I definitely agree with you. Migration should be taken as a challenge. Europe needs working force because we are old and there is a great potential. And I'm really fed up with politicians who say no migration, like my own Prime Minister. Why Hungarians are so diverse? Because we have so many nations in the country. And I would say the diversity, this is what European Social Democrats are fighting for. And we have a migration network, and we are working for that. But the problem is, probably we don't do something properly. We have to do it differently. That's why I believe you, as young ambassadors, you can help us how to change the mood, how to be sexy, how to be trendy. I believe that we can do it with you. And don't forget, it's always absolutely crucial when men support women. And I'm absolutely delighted to see my former party leader, who has been doing a great fight with me long years ago, Attila Mesterházy, because he thought he has to be here to support me when I am doing any fight here in Vienna, in Innsbruck, or anywhere in Europe, I would say. And I know time is not on my side. Agnes Heller, that's the proper pronunciation, I would say is an inspiration for all of us. If you don't respect the past, you have no future. So that's why we need to listen carefully what she said. Keep it in mind and act. And I would say, I feel lonely now because I'm alone. So please come to the podium and let's make it together. How can we change Europe with your generation? Oops! Does not matter. If somebody has to fall, then it falls. Please come, and then I would say you are the one who can introduce yourself. I would say Philip, you already talked about your vision. And I think you said that you are a European and you are a Pole European, but you are a progressive thinker who wants to change Europe. And of course, I would say, Mavi, you know why I admire you? Because you decided that you would like to taste the world. And how can you feel that people are different and the same at the same time? And if you allow me, there is a type of quote if you travel and lives in, so women and men who travels and live many places became, as the saying goes, traveling is the best antidote against stereotypes. So we have to fight against stereotypes, and that's why you are a pro-passionate feminist, I suppose, because I believe you have been outside of Europe, because to understand what's going on in Europe, you need to know what's going on in Europe. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear sisters and brothers, don't forget your roots. Social Democrats takes social rights, women's rights, and gender equality in the core of our values. And you don't know that Udo Bullmann, as vice chair of the group, dealt with women's rights and gender equality. And I was lucky to work with him because he understands when he works with a lot of fantastic women, and thanks for all the great colleagues who had it. Majority are women. Don't forget. You can change the world with women. And now that's a great occasion to give you the chance. Together, let's make and let's change Europe. Thank you so much. It's amazing to be here, which is a working class place. It was a bakery. And it is absolutely crucial not to forget who we are here for. We cannot forget. The world can change, but we cannot change our roots. Thank you very, very much. And now your turn.
Shall I stay? Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for the invitation, flying me in. It was very nice to be part of this interesting evening. It was mentioned that I was traveling a lot, and maybe I also lived in some places, it's true, but it's very important for me to say that...
You taught the German language.
Sure, yes, I speak German, it's true. I taught German in other countries, it's true too. But I did not just go away to have the exciting life always.
Of course.
I come from a very small town, and not even a town, it's part of a town. So in many Austrians know there are small towns in Austria. And I've always looked for opportunities too. And that's why I'm very connected to the social movement, because they give hope for people who are looking for a better opportunity sometimes. And right now I'm also able to work as a trainee for the S&D group in Brussels. And that's why I'm coming to the topic, democracy. I wish to talk about migration integration because it's very important. But the topic, to close it up in the evening, the other day, S&D trainees have visited an exhibition. There's many exhibitions in Brussels, and we were encouraged to write something small about democracy. And I tell you, none of us knew what to write right away. We didn't have the urge to go and say something about a very important topic. So what is wrong here? I said in the beginning, we need to think about what is democracy really. What it's translated to is what in school we learn, it's the power belongs to the people. So what is the problem that we really don't understand when we look around how important this is? We see people not being able or hindered to use their democratic rights, as in the Middle East or in countries as Poland and Russia and in Thailand and Cambodia. I work for the Human Rights Committee in the European Parliament, and we have just yesterday talked to opposition leaders of Thailand who were not able to campaign for their own cause. So we feel bad in Europe because we can see that we're living with leaders that were not elected by the majority. But my generation has never experienced this. We were encouraged to go to vote since we were 16 years old. And only in recent years, we understood how important democracy is when we were confronted with a president like Norbert Hofer, or later, in 2017, we saw that the number who went to the polls rised up higher and higher, and we had 80% of turnouts of voters. And also in the Brexit referendums, I don't know if you talked to a British person lately, but everybody was regretting that they did not go to vote because they didn't see the consequences. Or in other words, the consequences have not been told carefully enough. So that's what I think is the most important thing about democracy, that we don't even know how it is without it. Democracy is something that makes us believe that we are so far away from all the absolutistic tyrants and atrocities in the world that we can actually really forget about it in our life full of wealth and chances. But as I mentioned, slowly the number of people who are getting to the polls in times of change will be rising again, because I believe my generation of Austrians will not accept any more inequality that the recent government of Austria is spreading into people's mind. And also now, when we are facing the European elections, I think we will know that every voice is counting for freedom, equality, and solidarity in very fragile days of the Union. Until a future generation, maybe not mine, maybe not the next one, but the one after, will look far back to the ancient Greek when they think about democracy, and they have to write something on a whiteboard in an exhibition. Thank you.
So, hello everybody. My name is Philip, and as I said before, I'm a European. I'm the Pole. And I wanted to say that those two things don't exclude each other. And I could say even more, that they don't exclude each other because they actually complete together. The government in Brussels or Strasbourg consists of my representatives, the same as the one in my home country, Poland, or Germany, Austria. It doesn't matter. Personally, I believe that the European Union is something more than just the formal institution. It is the idea that we all, the Europeans, might finally unite one day under one flag and finally cooperate for a better future and stop fighting with each other for the power. And that is why it hurts me every time when I see how the populists in my country destroy the fundamental rights of our community. Because by this, they actually destroy our community, the European Union. And I wanted to say that it's actually incredible that they're also breaking our own constitution, which they talk a lot about the national stuff, but the truth is that all they care is power. We need to remember the populists, people like Jarosław Kaczyński, that their duty is to serve the community and make it strong, not to destroy it. We all see that they don't respond to the actions from the Brussels. That's why I think it's good that, let's say, we have the procedure of Article 7. But we cannot stop at this point. The article might stop the populists from destroying our country, but what about the future? Personally, I have several ideas how to, let's say, how to make the future bright again. It won't be easy, but we need to show our citizens that the hope is in EU, that we are present in their everyday lives, that the politicians are actually representing their interest, that they care about their faith, that they can come to the office of the parties with their problems, that their vote will actually change something. And actually, that's all what I wanted to say. And so that's it.
Well done. He's only 16. He's only 16. So we need young women and men to start that age to build our social democrat. And please go and vote, because you vote can change Europe for better. And we, social democrat, I promise, Udo Bullmann is such a fantastic leader. We are going to change Europe. Europe needs to turn left. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for your amazing inputs. Well, it's a day of falling things today. Just to make this clear, my time management was perfect before I left the stage to Sita, just for... But thank you very much. So, Josef Weidenholzer, wir kommen jetzt zu dem Punkt...
Josef Weidenholzer. We are now coming to the statement and conclusions, and I'd like to ask you to take over now.
Mir wurde gesagt, dass der Text dann hier gleich...
The text will be on the screen. It was an interesting, enlightening, moving event. And this really is calling for an informal conversation to follow. That's important. It was important for me that we've seen now here that Europe is made up of East and West, and that it does work well in that we can discuss with each other, and that we need to discuss a lot more together. Europe has two lungs, East and West. The human body has two lungs. Thank you for the contributions that we've heard, Mr. Geschwiller, amongst them. I'd like to confront you with one historic event. When in '56, the Soviet tanks were in Poland before the people, somebody sent in a telex which said, "We are going to die for Hungary and Europe." And that is the legacy of that message, which we need to bear in mind when we're defending democracy, rule of law in Europe. Let's take up that message. Maybe at that time nobody heard it, but now we are hearing it again, and we will take it forward. When dealing with East and West, we mustn't be contemptuous. We mustn't teach people lessons, nor must we allow for the reply given by people like Orban and others is masculine, destructive aggressivity, which is hitting us. It can only work with willingness to self-criticism on all sides. That's when we will be taking Europe forward, when East and West at long last will agree. And much of what I've just said is reflected in our statement, which we drafted, which we then amended following the comments that we received. And I would like us to put this to you by acclamation. Uda and I well, as he is our chairman, I will give Udo the word, but thank him so much for having made it possible for us to have this evening. And after this event, I'm a little more optimistic that here in Vienna we've made a point. We will find an answer, and we will word it so that people will understand it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Wir brauchen mehr Demokratie, nicht.
So we need more democracy, not less. That's how the statement ends. So we've come to the point now where I would like everybody who has spoken to come up here for a photograph. There are others as well. I think it would be lovely if everyone could come up here onto the podium so we can have a joint photo. It's time now for talks, bilateral talks, if you like, a conversation outside the room. But could you please all come up onto the podium, onto the stage for a photograph? Thank you very much for taking part, for participating. Thank you very much for your commitment as well. We have a reception now. It's just through there. So you need to go through the curtains to the reception. So please do stay on and we can have time for a chat.
Your love drives a man insane. You broke my will, but what a thrill. Goodness gracious, great balls.